Good evening and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics, tonight's video is Dungeon Mastering Tips and Ideas That Worked. And today I'm going to focus on the three pillars of tabletop RPGs, that is combat, exploration, and role-playing. Occasionally, role-playing is interchanged with interaction or social interaction, but basically I'm talking about the role playing that the DM is going to do with the players through the NPCs and then player to player role playing and player to NPC role playing as well. So during this video, I'm not going to just talk as a dungeon master. I'm also going to speak about these three pillars as a player as well. So in the last couple of weeks, I've been having an exchange, sometimes contentious, over the issue of these three pillars, and in particular, how Wizards of the Coast has been framing the introduction of the role playing pillar as it's been seen through Strixhaven. And I've avoided talking directly about Strixhaven because I do not own it. I haven't read it firsthand, but I've listened to hours upon hours of commentary over it, and the one thing that I really have an issue with is that it's once again Wizards of the Coast and other commentators, although there's very few of them that I've seen, but there are a couple of other commentators that are acting as if these three pillars had not existed in any true form since since 5e. All right, so going back to the past, you didn't see all three of these pillars, and it's just not correct. It's not true. Um, all three of these pillars have been represented. Now we can argue back and forth whether the game in general is more focused towards combat and exploration and role playing are secondary to the combat, and even then, I think that's either a very simplistic view of how we run these games and how we play these games. It's also tied to the fact that, yes, the combat has more mechanics built around it than does exploration, and certainly more so than the role playing aspect of it. But there's a reason for that. All right, the reason for that is that the combat is the one thing that is not completely within the control of either the dungeon master or the players. The combat is the one thing that has the most variable, the most luck of the dice rolls tied to it. And that's because if you didn't have that random outcome, if it were just left up to the players and the DM to decide what the outcome of combat is, very few players are going to opt to have their characters fail, especially in combat. And very few DMs, I believe, are going to make sure that if they're making the decision, that the players fail, because then they would be, they'd feel like, oh, then I am an adversarial DM. And so the game system allows for the dice to determine that. And in order to know when and how to use dice, that's where the rules come in. You need fewer rules for exploration other than simply adding modifiers to the outcomes if players are are asking questions, if players are looking to do something, and then you're going to set up the scenario where they're exploring, they're going into a wilderness or terrain type that might impact their movement, or might impact it, and so you're applying these modifiers to what they've chosen to do. Role playing or interaction with NPCs, or NPCs interacting with the player characters, uh, those interactions are either being controlled by the DM or they're being decided by the players. And you don't need dice other than, again, modifiers, such as the modifiers that you see attached to attribute scores, charisma, and in some cases comeliness, if you're using either of those two systems that came out of Unearthed Arcana and Oriental Adventures. But they're modifiers to the reaction checks that are taking place between NPCs and player characters, and they're not deciding what is being what is occurring. They're really based on what the player is saying that he or she is looking to do with their character, and then you as a DM are just checking to see what's the general start point of where the NPC is at in that first consultation with the or confrontation with the player characters, and then how is it modified. It doesn't require a rule to say this is how we're going to conduct an interaction. It doesn't say, well, if you don't interact this way, then this is going to happen, or you're not going to have access to this, or whatever. It's not something that needs to be plotted out or determined by a game mechanic. It's something that the players are going to learn how to do, and the DMs are going to learn um, how to judge or adjudicate what actually happens in those interactions. It's much more just determining randomly those interactions, but usually you're just going to use a modifier in order to do that. It's the role isn't going to tell you what to do. The role is going to tell you how did your action turn out, and that's I think the nuance that many people who are saying, well, there was no role playing in the older editions of Dungeons and Dragons, or it was very limited, and combat had all of the rules attached to it, and exploration maybe was just in passing, barely mentioned. All right, and role playing was also very much ignored as a game mechanic, and that's because it didn't need to be, and still doesn't need to be, a game mechanic. So, talking about my tips and ideas that I have found that works is that when I'm writing an adventure, I make sure that every adventure, no matter how long the session is going to last or how many multiple sessions a particular adventure might require, I make sure that every adventure has some travel involved. All right, and I'm going to go with these, one at a time. So travel. Travel could be walking down a flight of stairs. All right, that's all it needs to be. It's any time the player characters are moving, more than just one, 10-foot square, but anytime that they're walking down a flight of stairs, that is an opportunity for you to to enhance that experience by making it interesting, by making it, they could be going down a flight of stairs, let's say it's 70 feet long, and they're walking down this flight of stairs, and along the walls there are frescoes and different images that the players can decide, well, I'm going to take a look at this, and I'm going to see, and I'm going to potentially learn something from these images. Why were they carved into the walls, or why were they painted on these walls? And that's how they might glean some information about whatever area they're walking into. So again, that doesn't require rolling. That requires players asking questions as they're walking down a flight of stairs. Well, what do I see? And is there anything interesting or looks out of place or anything like that? And then the DM says, well, there there are images along the walls. All right, and you can tell, kind of looking at them, that each panel seems to be telling some kind of a story. All right, and now the players are asking questions. Exploration or travel doesn't have to be a long distance in order for it to become meaningful. If they are going on a long distance trip, that's where you get into some of the logistical aspects of the game. All right, what kind of travel rations are they traveling with? When are they going to look to rest along the way? What's their setup going to be when they stop for a rest? Are they going to forage while they're there? Are they going to um, set up a watch to make sure that they're going to be safe through the night? Who's sleeping in what order? These are things that in my game the players actually talk about, and they set it up, and they say, all right, well, who needs to study spells tonight? All right, you're going to take the first watch or no watch at all, because we want to make sure tomorrow um, the magic user has had his or her solid 6 hours of sleep, so that when they wake up in the morning, even if they had a watch, they will have their spells ready. Same thing with the clerics or any of the other spell cards. They take priority in in their sleep schedule, and that's part of the exploration aspect of the game. All right, because if they're not traveling, they don't have to take that consideration, in mind. So exploration, again, can be a very short distance, can be a very long distance. You handle them differently. The players should be thinking about traveling. They should be thinking about exploring the areas that they're in, and looking for details that might inform them about what they're actually doing, or what kind of an area are they walking into. Um, Exploration is exploration of the ideas and the societal norms of the area that they're traveling in, and so exploration is also not just physically exploring around, but it's about learning about the lore, and that means the history of the place that they're in, learning about the economic and political interactions that are taking place, or events that are taking place in the current location that they're in, or where they're looking to go to. They want to explore information about where they're about to head to, so that they can be better prepared for that. So this exploration component has been there since 1974. All right. We might not have labeled it the three pillars of, role playing games, but the point is that they've always been there. And then finally, the role playing. Again, whenever I'm writing an adventure, I am making sure that the player characters are going to have opportunities to interact with each other. They're going to interact with NPCs, or they're going to interact with even the creatures that they are fighting. Their adversaries, whether they be orcs or hobgoblins or dragons or ettins or whatever they're going to manage, or other humans or elves or demi-humans. Anytime that they're in a situation, I'm looking for opportunities for them to interact, and I'm prepared to respond with answers should they request, ask for information. Try to encourage them to do it through their characters. So that's a tip that I've found actually helps the players get more immersed into their characters. I have sometimes stepped out of the role of simply a referee to to just give them a hint or a tip as far as, well, ask me as your character would. What would your character be thinking? Just as a simple reminder, not telling them information, but just reminding them, frame it in a way of, this is what my character is thinking and expressing to other characters, other player characters in the group. And sometimes they need that little reminder, and that's fine. You're not breaking the immersion every once in a while when you step out of the action of the gameplay, and you remind them of something that that the player character should know, but maybe the player forgot. And that's another thing that, when it's done very infrequently, it's just, your character should have remembered this, and I'll give you an opportunity to try to remember, and then have your character express it. So, and then the character interacts. You should have sessions that are that focus more on that interaction with NPCs and such. So every once in a while, you should throw a session in there where you don't really plan on any combat. Now, that doesn't mean that combat can't happen, because the players have agency over their characters, and out of the blue, they can decide that, oh, I'm going to do something that is now going to create a conflict that you as a DM might not have been expecting. And so you have to respond to it. And so sometimes, even if you weren't planning on there being anything but an NPC interaction, that combat comes into play. And then that might result in a new idea coming up, or a new avenue that the player characters now have to prepare for, and that leads to additional exploration. So these three things are happening all the time, all right, or at least they should be, and you should be trying to encourage your players to keep on thinking as their characters, and keep on expressing through their characters what their characters are seeing. And the DM, your role is to explain things as the characters would see them, not as the players know, but as the characters would see them. And that's how you're getting these three: combat, exploration, and role playing to actually function. Now, Some of the other things I wanted to bring up about the older editions versus the more modern editions, certainly, 5e is an example of this, where the player character sheets have a whole lot of information on them today. And a lot of that information is something that I think players are relying upon in order to role play their characters, and it's not necessary, and in many cases it's actually preventing the players from going in directions that they normally wouldn't have gone in. All right, and the best way I can explain that is I literally just played a very first session in or using the Holmes edition of Dungeons and Dragons, or Blue Home if you happen to have if you happen to have the OSR Blue Home Journeyman rules, which is the rule system kind of boiled down and repackaged of the Holmes edition, the Eric Holmes edition of Dungeons and Dragons. And what was unique about this particular version of Dungeons and Dragons is that it allowed for the DM to let the players play any kind of a creature that could be found in the rule book. All right, so you could play monster classes. You could play an orc. You could play a goblin. You could play a lizard man. And in fact, that was one of the earliest characters I ever played in Dungeons and Dragons. Probably 77 or 78. I played a lizard man, and that was either from the Holmes edition or just my DM allowed me to play it because it was in the Monster Manual, which came out around 78, 79. So if I played that character as early as 77 or 78, it was definitely from the Holmes edition, and that was the edition that we were using, that he owned. Um, but with today's character, so I took a pre-gen character from the DM, and it's a DM I'm very familiar with. He actually plays in my game. His name's Ivan. He plays Cedric in my Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game. The other player that was along with us is Amanda, and she and I played in Ivan's game for many months. That we ran through. We played D&D, and then we took the same characters and ported over into an RPG that he is writing himself, and we just wrapped up that campaign. So it was just the two of us for today. There were three other players who are supposed to come on board, and so I took a pre-gen, and my pre-gen is a berserker. So it was like, well, is that a fighter subclass? And he told me, no, that was just from basically the monster manual under humans, and I just took that category of human monster, um, or human NPC, and made that a class that you could choose to pick, and follows the D8 rules for hit points. So unlike a fighter, it's D8 instead of a D10, but it has some attributes and abilities that a berserker has. And so I took this character, pre-gen, and I started thinking about, well, how am I going to role play this character? And so I start looking through his attributes, and here's the character sheet. I mean, it's very simple. Not a lot going on there. No background, no other information there. And I just looked at the stats. I was like, all right, a 16 strength, a 13 intelligence, a 13 wisdom, an 11 constitution, a 13 dexterity, and a 10 charisma. All right, my character is a berserker, but he has a fairly high both intelligence and wisdom. And so I started incorporating that into what his personality was going to be like. So he's a berserker, but he has a great deal of control in both intelligence and wisdom as to when he is going to use that. But before we even began the session, I already started role playing the character based on just what I saw on the attributes. I didn't even get to beyond his abilities, and we hadn't even started the game session. And that's what I was already, working on. I started looking at his. I started looking at his languages. So he's a Northman, and these were already pre-written. Northman, Common, and then Player's Choice, Player's Choice. So I was like, okay, so I'm going to have two choices of languages. Let me see what's going to come of it once we actually start playing and we start talking with one another and seeing, because I had no idea where my character was going to come from and no idea who the other player characters were yet. Once we got together, we started talking a little bit about my character, and I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to probably be a barbarian berserker type society that I'm coming from, and it'll be near the mountains and such. So that's where his wilderness survival will be like. He's a Northman from like a mountainous region, and so I'm going to take Dwarven and Giant as my languages, my secondary languages that I'll also have along with the Northman language and the Common language. Then I found out that Amanda, the other player, she's playing a brass dragon, which again, like I said, is you find it in the Holmes edition of Dungeons and Dragons. You could play anything that's in the monster manual. So she's playing a brass dragon, and this was a also a pre-gen character, and so she starts asking the DM, well, how long have our two characters or whatever? It just came up. Like how do our two characters know each other? And he said, well, you've actually known each other for quite some time. Now I knew that I had to pick up at least two additional languages because of my intelligence, and I said, well, you know what? The other one I'm going to take Draconic because now I know that we've known each other for a while, and that will be our connection. Is that we've known each other for a while, and now I have another language that I'm going to want to pick up and utilize during the course of our adventuring together. More role playing, and interaction with another player now at this point, and trying to develop a story that's just a relationship story between the two of us and where it kind of came from. And so didn't need rules to do that. We weren't rolling any dice to determine that. It was just a matter of looking at the character sheets, talking to one another, and then coming up with something that was plausible. All right. And that has always been in the game. That goes all the way back to the Holmes edition. All right. So you're going all the way back to 1977, 1978. All right. And those components are in there. The exploration comes back in again because we're talking about, well, where did our characters come from? All right. And so that instills upon it the ideas of, well, we obviously did some exploring. We got to this town here now. We came from a wilderness area. And so these are all the components that are coming in. During our session today, we had some combat. We started to establish some of the ways that we interact in combat now. And again, all three work together. All three function as components. That's why they're called pillars. The game structure does not stand if you take one of the pillars away. It topples over. It's like a bar stool, right? A three-legged bar stool. It doesn't work without all three. And if you're the dungeon master or you're a player, both of you have a responsibility to yourselves so that you're enjoying the game to its fullest, to keep on thinking about those three components of role playing or tabletop role playing games. Is that I always have to be prepared for combat, because combat is the one thing that is somewhat out of my control and somewhat out of the dungeon master's control as well. Um, Exploration, ask those questions. Try to learn as much as you can about the environment that you're in, the locale that you're in. And remember, travel can be a short distance thing, and you could still learn a lot from that travel. There could be a lot of hazards in a very short distance travel. And when you are on a very long journey, remember that there are elements in the game rules, and there's elements on the equipment chart that you have to consider if you are doing a long adventure, a long journey that you're traveling on. There's costs, there's uh, different ways or means of travel, different modes of travel, I should say, and there's you just function as a group differently when you're traveling a long distance than if you're going just a very short distance. So all of these things have been there. They've been there forever. And that's the one real issue I take with some of the most recent discussions that I've seen about these things being brought in by Wizards of the Coast with just their product line of 5e, and just that idea that, oh well, this is new. It's not new. They might have put a different label on it, but to use a line, not meaning to be political, but you know, President Obama, very famously said, you didn't build that. All right, and I think Wizards of the Coast needs to remember that, and the modern players need to understand that 5e didn't create many of the things that it claims that it did. Um, it's not really even focusing more on the things that they claim that they are, because they've always been there, and even a middle of the road dungeon master had been using those three pillars uh, in creating their games, or just in running the games. You could run a module and still hit all three of these components, because they're cooked into modules as well. So there's always combat, exploration, and role playing opportunities in an officially licensed and released module. So these ideas that this is new is just ludicrous. And uh, and as far as dungeon mastering tips and ideas that I found work, those are to incorporate these three things into your game sessions, or certainly into your adventures as often as possible. Um, every adventure should have at least a little bit of each, and once in a while one might be more of the focus than the other two, and that's fine. All right, but make sure that you're mixing it up, and and you will find that you're enjoying it more, and your players are enjoying the experience more as well. So once again, um, dungeon mastering tips and ideas that worked. Always, this is from my perspective, what I have found worked. You might use different things. You might disagree with me. That's fine. My ideas might not work for you. All right. But if they do, and you've learned something from this, then that's even better. I'm glad to have the opportunity to put that out to you, so that you can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to just keep this in mind when I'm running a game, to make sure that there's a little bit of the three that my players are going to interact with. So Once again, thanks for joining. I hope you like this video. And as always, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Um, Most people play during the weekend, so if you have a game going on tomorrow, I hope you enjoy it. Have fun at your table. That's bottom line. One of the most important things is to have fun at your table, if not the most important thing. And I hope these tips and and ideas help you out as well. And I look forward to seeing you on a gaming screen sometime soon. Next week is beginning of another holiday season. So we're in a long holiday season, so some gameplay might be disrupted during the next week and a half or so. So I know that my group is going to miss January 27th. We're not going to run our regular game on that day, although I might actually sit in and play this character for another session since today's session was kind of short. I'm hoping to meet the other three players and hopefully we'll get a little game time in there as well. So, but going through the next week and a half or so, I don't expect to have too many gaming videos come out and not too many game sessions going on. Still going to have Monday night's game this week, and then we'll see what happens for next week. So once again, thanks for joining. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Have a great night.